Today, I think we are going to embark on an interesting topic, and that's the topic of Samadhi. Now, what I'd like you to do, or what I'd like to do today, is I want to offer some commentary on what Swami Kriyananda has written in his commentary on these slokas that we're addressing today, but not so much to go to recapitulate what Swamiji has said, because it's as we work our way through the Yoga Sutras week by week, I'm expecting you to have a copy of the Yoga Sutras, and ideally you will have be reading a copy from this, Demystifying Patanjali, Swami Kriyananda's commentary on that. And I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that you're reading along with me. And so I don't want to just recapitulate what Swami said, but I am going to be referring to what he said. So you need to, from week to week, read that. And if you haven't, this topic on Samadhi, I think, is very intriguing. And if you're interested in that concept, and I think all of us are, I'm sure if we're on the spiritual yogic journey, I think that crosses our attention or catches our attention. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to start by giving an impression of something I noticed when I was, many years ago, I was reading the early lessons that Paramhansa Yogananda wrote when he went to America, and he started his work there, and 1920, and by the middle of the 1920s, probably by 25, 26, he had shifted, of course, his center from East Coast to Los Angeles and was beginning there. And he began sending out regular lessons, you see, to correspondence students. And he figured this would be the best way to reach a large audience. He had done quite a bit of traveling already by then, but he needed to follow up. And how can you possibly go into these topics in a depth and reach out and reach thousands of people just by traveling alone? And so they were complementary, his traveling, but also he began to write the lessons, and he wrote a series of lessons basically outlining the basic framework of the teachings that he presented. And that to this day, we still, in one form or another, those of us who follow the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda learn these techniques and teachings. But he did it very cryptically, very quickly at first. And then as the years went by, he expanded them and he refined them. He wrote them one time, another time, and another time, and so on. And so, but I was reading some of the early ones, and I remember there was one particularly where he comes to what's, for those of you who know Yogananda's teachings, the Om technique of meditation. And in the Om technique of meditation, it's trying to listen to the sounds of Om, and the idea being that you have each of the individual chakras in the astral body, in the astral spine, emit a particular sound. And this is ancient tradition, ancient mystical tradition of yoga, not commonly spoken of, however. I mean, you could, when you come onto the path of yoga, and maybe you learn hatha yoga, maybe you learn to meditate, very rarely are you going to find somebody who has the depth of knowledge to be able to begin to go into the subtleties of something like the chakras, the various colors of the chakras, which, by the way, just as an aside, you see people talking about the chakras and they show you this rainbow of colors from the bottom, red at the bottom, then it kind of orange, and working their way up to blue at the top. And like Swamiji says, that's rather a poetic way to look at it. It's not really literally the colors of the chakras. So anyway, that aside, that each of the chakras emits a certain sound. And so in those early lessons, he addresses this Om technique of meditation, and he says to the people, now close your eyes, center yourself. And I'm paraphrasing here because it's been many years since I read those. I can't remember the exact wording, but it goes something like, center yourself, get very calm, go in, slow the breath, and listen then to the sound of which, let's say, the first Muladhara chakra, bumblebee sound. Listen to the sound of the bumblebee and immerse yourself into that sound. Now, take your consciousness and put it on the Swadhisthana and listen to the Krishna's flute. And it's really wonderful. You read that and you go, oh my God, this is wonderful. But how many people could do that? He made it sound so easy. You could see, you just say, oh, okay. And I did that and I listened and I didn't hear any bumblebee. And I didn't hear it. But I didn't doubt. I mean, this is not, I mean, what he was saying is corroborated by the ancient tradition, yogic mystical tradition. But he made it sound so easy. And now that has some positives and perhaps some negatives to it. The negative, of course, being is this guy, he doesn't know, I can't hear any of this. This is totally untrue, because he was revealing some knowledge that is really only accessible to people who are very advanced meditators. If it's true, if you can go into that depth, I mean, one, you have to go beyond body consciousness pretty much, and how many people can do that? And you begin to hear these sounds, but he presented it as like it's on the fingertips, it's available. And I thought that was the positive side of it, because he made these mystical realities seem so close. We too, I too. Now, if I'm sure most of you, all of you have read the autobiography of a yogi. He comes to that point where he has that experience in my experience in cosmic consciousness. And he's meditating in his guru's ashram, and his guru says, Mukunda, and calls down to him while he's meditating there. And he says, and he doesn't answer. And Sri Yukteswar gets a little bit more stern of voice and calls him, and very loudly, Mukunda. And then Master finally relents, says, Master, I'm meditating. And Sri Yukteswar can see, what's going on. He says, it's like your mind is like dry leaves in the wind. You're not meditating, come up here. And he does, and he goes up very a little bit shamefacedly, goes up and bows to his guru, and the guru, he says, poor boy, that what you really want, and he's going to give it to him. And he taps him on the chest, and Yogananda goes into an ecstatic state. He says, as if the breath was sucked out of him, and he went into this ecstatic state of samadhi. And it's that wonderful chapter, and you read that poem of samadhi, and again, you think, oh, it's just at my fingertips, around the corner. If I could only find the Sri Yukteswar in my life to help me to be able to do that, it's right there. And I mean, at least this was my impression, at least, that, oh my God, this is something available to me. And I think that's good. That is absolutely good, because then you read that poem, Samadhi, which, by the way, Yogananda said he wrote on the New York subway. He said late at night, he rode the subway from one of the lines from beginning to end and back again. He just sat there, and he said they didn't notice me. Now, I always kind of wondered, nobody noticed him. I always kind of wondered if he was visible even, but because he was in obviously an ecstatic state. So, but he wrote that, and it expresses the concepts of samadhi just in poetic form, that you read that and you just pulls you into it. And he said, I want that. And it's advisable, listen to it again and again and again, and to be able to mentally get a concept, and which is, of course, impossible with our limited mind, but nevertheless, pulls us in. Now, I say this is a positive, because if you're an aspirant, you just can't help but say, this is what I want, and it's accessible to me. And where else, really, can you find that message delivered as Yogananda did to the masses? Now, in years, I was given a different class some week or 2 or 3 ago, and actually Yogananda was criticized for, you might say, revealing ancient deep truths so casually, you might say, to the masses. And they said, oh, he brought the high teachings of our ancient tradition down shame on him, more or less is there, you could get that attitude, you might say, behind their criticism. But he made it accessible to people, and he spoke commonly, and he said, this is accessible to you. It's not some esotericism that is available only to those yogis up in the high mountain caves or priests in some jungle kutir. And remember what he said in the Autobiography of a Yogi? And I think this was in the chapter when Lahiri's revealing the Kriya Yoga, bringing it down for the Himalayas. He says, it has been revealed in this time. Up until now, it had been not revealed because of two forces: mankind's indifference and priestly secrecy. You see, the idea that, oh, you can't tell people, there's this tendency to keep things secret. Now there's a lot of motivations why that might be, but you can think about that. But he brought them down to the, you might say, the odd maybe of the common man, and to be able to say, this is for everybody. We're now in an age where this teachings of Kriya, these teachings of deep mystical teachings, can now be brought forth because, one, there's less indifference now, and two, it's a time is right for this to happen. So that criticism sometimes you'll see for that of making these things available. He was the jeweler, as he said to Sri Yukteswar when Sri Yukteswar questioned him about this. He says, sir, but you're the goldsmith. I'm the jeweler making beautiful things out of this fine gold. Well, that and Master Yoga, or Sri Yukteswar, he said, yeah, he nodded. He understood what he was saying. And so in here, you see this, what is Patanjali doing? Patanjali obviously was a master, a realized master. He was speaking from personal experience, direct perception. And he reveals here in the exact same, I think, in very much the same spirit of Yogananda, revealing this. And he just sets it out there that this is available to you. Now, we've started, and only a few weeks we're into this discussion of the Yoga Sutras, and he basically starts off by defining yoga. He says, you have vrittis, calm the vrittis. Here's they need to detachment, not being attached to those vrittis, calming. And he basically then from there gives them a few hints about that, how to do that. And immediately he makes available this discussion on Samadhi, this deep state that mystics speak about and have spoken about for thousands of years. And it's presenting them just as Master has done in this lifetime or this age. Patanjali does that. It's here, it's available. And he doesn't wait until the end of the book. He does it right at the beginning. So this, all you have to do, and I really, I refer to Sloka 121. Now he's already spoken a little bit by that time about Samadhi, but in Sloka 121, he says, with keen and one-pointed practice, this highest attainment comes easily. And that's sort of like Yogananda talking about listening to the sounds of the chakras. It comes easily. And then the average person just shakes their head. But Patanjali was talking also, he was talking to high souls, people who had some insight. But again, he does qualify. It says with keen and one-pointed practice. And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves when we say, well, I'm not getting this Samadhi in my life. What's wrong? And he says it's with keen and one-pointed insight. And we have to ask ourselves, do we have that keen and one-pointed insight? And he then, of course, describes what's required for the yogi to be able to attain that highest state of Samadhi. And of course, we know from the reading here, he describes Samadhi. There's two states, and this is Yogananda's commentaries and his teachings explains. And Yogananda uses a term slightly different than refers to samadhi in slightly different terms, but it's just a matter of language. And Yogananda used the word sabikalpa samadhi as that first state, and nirvikalpa samadhi as that higher state of samadhi. And what he says is that which is required of the yogi to attain these high states. He gives 5 things, and these are the essentials, you might say. Faith, and of course, faith, is more than just belief. For faith is based on experience, which leads to a very deep devotion. We have to have great faith based upon our step-by-step experience of all the preliminary things that we need to learn in order to, that's why we practice these techniques. Great faith based on experience, and then going one step more, one step more, one step more. And in the process of this, we develop personal experience of the preliminary stages, and this gives us a great sense of confidence that what is being spoken about is true. Second thing that Patanjali mentions here is strength of will. The strength, you could say, needed to face the tests that come of our karma. Because you see, when we reach these high states, we cannot go beyond even samadhi to total liberation until we are able to burn up that past karma. And burning up karma implies a certain amount of testing of us, being able to face that which comes to us in life. And that takes a great strength of will, persistence, and everything that goes with that to be able to achieve that. And we have to accept the fact, if you're going to take up the spiritual quest, you have to accept that you will be tested. And you could say, the saying is, God tests his devotees, because God doesn't give himself easily. He doesn't just casually, just because you cry and call, doesn't mean that. It's like that story that Ramakrishna used to say. He says, it's like God is the Divine Mother's, our mother, and we're like the child who cries and cries for the mother to come. But the mother gives us toys, and when we get a toy, we're happy and we stop crying. He says we have to reach that point in our spiritual journey that we're no longer satisfied with toys. Nothing will satisfy us other than the mother herself coming. And so that strength of will to endure that journey, and with faith, is not common. And we're tested, and we fall. And every devotee falls. This is something that the gurus say. Every devotee falls along the way. The point is, does the devotee get up again and again and again? And there was a dream that one of the fellow disciples, Gurubhais of Swami Kriyananda at Master's ashram, said he was relating this dream, and I think he was relating it to Master, but Master corroborated that the message was true. That in his dream, he saw all the disciples running a race. They're running a race. Maybe it was on a track, I'm not sure. And he said he saw every disciple stumble and fall. And some would get up very slowly. They just lay there. Some would get up a little bit quicker. And then some would just get up and start running again real quick. And there were very few. This person commented, and they said, yes, when people were asking him, was I in that race? Did you see? And he said, yes. And Swami Kriyananda, the man commented that, yes, I saw you in the race too. You got up very quickly. You kept on going. You were one of the ones who got up quickly, kept going. And this is what we have to reflect back on ourselves. Now, the third I mentioned too, faith, strength of will, mindfulness. Keep the thought of, I don't mean mindfulness meditation technique, although that's helpful, but I mean something more. The true meaning of the message of mindfulness is keeping the thought of one's goal always in mind, so that when we do stumble, we don't, look at where we are, what happened here, although maybe we learned the lesson by reflecting on that, but we keep looking at that goal and get up and go. It's keeping the thought of one's goal always in mind. And the fourth thing, in order to reach the highest state, now we're talking about liberation here. He says, or you could say, even back it up once, nirvikalpa samadhi, that state when we're in the state of samadhi, we're in God communion all the time, in not just in trance state, but in every action of our life, when we've gone beyond karma, attachment, or where we've gone beyond the creation of new karma, let's say, beyond ego identity. The fourth thing that's needed is sabikalpa samadhi. And that's, in a sense, you could say, perhaps what all of us, the situation where we're all now in our lives striving for that state of sabikalpa samadhi, which is what Master experienced with Sri Yukteswar at that time. He went in to that state, that trance state. When we go into that state of oneness with the universe, with all, the expanse, that thing that all of us deep in our heart we yearn for, we go into that. But it's conditional in a sense. We cannot hold it. We come back out. We learn in time through practice with Guru's grace. We learn to be able to go back and control that until finally we go beyond it and we're in that state of consciousness at will in any time of our day, our life. That's nirvikalpa samadhi, complete oneness. Now, but this first stage has to be passed through first, the sabikalpa state. And the fifth quality to help us do that is discrimination, the ability to choose the highest course towards one's goal and to avoid the byways. In other words, to not get lost along the way in the myriad delusions of Maya. And that statement, or that conclusion there, reminded me of something that Swamiji said in this commentary here, is that sabikalpa, this state of sabikalpa that we're aiming for, is still on a subtle level. We haven't completely ridded ourselves of ego yet. Why? It's a temporary, you could say. We're temporary. We go beyond. In other words, the waves of those vrittis have been calmed momentarily, but yet not permanently. And because the remnants of ego live not in this figure, the ego itself does not have its seat, you could say, in this physical body. It's an aspect of the astral body. And so we have to go into that state where we leave this physical reality behind, and slowly we begin to identify beyond the astral body itself until that becomes purified also. And then we go beyond. And so as long as there's a remnant, you might say a seed of the ego consciousness still in us in the astral body, we are subject to the fluctuations. And the ego itself and is interesting thing, the way Swamiji mentions this. He says the ego itself is strengthened in that regard. Yes, we are, you could say, detaching ourselves from it, but the power of the ego itself doesn't become weak, it becomes strong. And unless we are able to transcend that and go beyond that, we begin to identify with it, the ego on a subtler level. And Swami makes an interesting point. He says this is one of the things that many people, they reach this state of sabikalpa samadhi, and it develops a certain spiritual pride within them. They say, oh, I have a certain power now. I'm this or I'm that. And you see that I-ness, it begins to be strengthened, because now you really have something. You really have something then. And you can use that. Maybe there's a little power that goes with it, you see. And that identification on that level can be very strong. And eventually that will lead to a downfall. And it was interesting, he writes in here in his commentary, Swami does, that he always had a sense that in some previous lifetime, there was reasons why he felt this, that he had been able to attain that state of samadhi in a previous lifetime. But because of that egoic pull, he fell from that state. And Yogananda didn't dissuade him. He didn't necessarily corroborate that, but he didn't dissuade him from that thought either. And one of the effects of when we attain that state, but then we fall away from it, is that it creates within us a very deep longing to get back to it. But so it can actually be quite painful. There was a story of a disciple who approached Paramhansa Yogananda and asked him, please give me samadhi, give me samadhi. And he pestered Yogananda quite repeatedly. And finally, Yogananda, a little bit in a voice of exasperation, said, if I gave this to you now in the state that you are, you would not be able to hang on to it. And once you lost it, you would not be able to live with yourself. It'd be so painful to you. And so he didn't give him that blessing of samadhi. And then again, Dr. Lewis, another disciple, asked, maybe even he was the one in the first story, but I don't know that. He asked, Master, please will you give me samadhi? He pestered him also. And Yogananda one day just looked at him very strongly. He says, and if I gave it to you, could you take it? And we so strong looking into Dr. Lewis's eyes that Dr. Lewis back to me said, no, sir, no, sir. Because he caused Dr. Lewis to reflect on his own abilities and power, and he didn't. Now, in Swami's case, Master Yogananda told him, he says, you won't be free. In this case, he was meaning I don't think he meant final liberation, but no, free in the sense of free from ego identification until death must be your last sacrifice, until the time of death. And so you could say that Yogananda had other work for Swami to do in the meantime. But that doesn't mean those of us who are also striving very deeply to reach this state of unity, that doesn't mean that we won't get glimpses of that. That doesn't mean that we won't feel the deep effects of that. The taste of it comes to us in many forms. And nevertheless, and it's something that we get those tastes. And even though perhaps we don't totally go beyond the breath, totally find ourselves like Master, when Sri Yukteswar gave him that experience, those little tastes, those rays that come out, touch us, and we have an experience that is you might say, just the hem of the garment. And it affects us, and we remember it for the rest of our life. And it inspires us. We say, that's what I want. And when you have one of those experiences, nothing can convince you that there's not truth there, because it's so powerfully engaging. And this comes to us. I consider these things to be Guru's grace. They are the Guru and Divine Mother, who I think of as Guru also. Guru Yogananda being a representation of Divine Mother, feeds us these. And we develop that faith through our experience, step by step, until we get to the point where we can go beyond that ego binding. And this is why it's so important when we meditate that we approach samadhi, we approach the spiritual path as an effort of self-giving, a sense of not I am wanting to attain this high state of samadhi And that self-identification that goes with it. I remember years ago, a student wrote me a letter and said, I'm willing to do anything. I'll come to India. I'll do anything if I can be guaranteed that and you can give me some guarantee that I will attain Samadhi in 6 months. And I could tell right away that if even one who would ask such a question had a bit of a challenge ahead of them. 6 months, no. So I wrote him back a very nice letter. I hope it was nice, but say no. That right there, that conditionalness is not right. You're identified, and the thought that if I attain this, then that sense of I needs to be relinquished. And that's what we approach when we meditate, that giving up that sense of I, or doing our techniques, which we know are going to take us in that direction. We do them with the sense of serviceful giving that way. Swami Kriyananda, but he said, don't be shy about not setting goals for yourself. And he would say that Yogananda's path of Kriya Yoga, look upon it as Samadhi affirming. We're affirming every day in every way. I'm taking one step closer, not to the experience so much of in terms of something personal pleasure, but in terms of the relinquishing of those attachments, those elements that are going to keep me from being able to experience it. I want God's love. That's what I want. All of us, that's what we want, to feel that union with the divine. And that's what Samadhi is about. Samadhi is that sense of oneness, that sense of ever new bliss, that sense of fulfillment of all of what we've been longing for. Completion, in other words, a sense of unity. And what is that? That's love. That's a sense of divine love. And Patanjali, by introducing this to it and saying, yeah, it's easy, it's easy. One-pointedness will get you there. But implied in that is a lot of work. I find that very encouraging. And I think Patanjali, by putting it out there in the very first chapters, you might say, is like master in that way, setting the stage. I can do this. We can do this. What's it going to take? And then motivating us. And then listen to that poem. Get a audio. We have a metaphysical meditations audio that you can. I don't know where you get it. Probably go to ananda.org. perhaps, or anandaindia.org, and download that. And it's Swami reading that poem with a little bit of musical accompaniment in the background. And it's so inspiring. He said, Yogananda said, if you can, memorize that poem. And in this way, we also, I think, by Samadhi affirming and seeing our practice that way, we introduce these concepts, which you could say have been hidden by priestly secrecy, been hidden by mankind's indifference for ages. We bring them to the surface in this age, and we make this not some hidden mystery. Now, it is a mystery, but why does it need to be hidden? Now, people say, well, you do not want to throw pearls before swine, from that Bible saying. And it's true, you have to be with discretion. But for the true seeker, the fact that Yogananda came, say, just as in the tradition of Patanjali, step by step by step, these are available to all. And this was what Yogananda came into this world as an avatar for this Dwapara Yuga, is to break with the past, that secrecy and indifferent and those blockages, and introduce into the world something that, and saying, you too can do this, but you have to do the work. And that's the catch, you might say. Now, he wasn't misleading. He was just letting you find out for yourself. All of us find out self. If we're willing to do the work, if we're willing to reach our hand up to the divine will reach down to us. It's there available, because all of us are children of the divine. And so this was my impression of these readings this week on the topic of samadhi. I do recommend that you do read them for yourself, and they're very interesting. That goes into it a little bit, that and little by little we cut those ties that hold us into this body. So I'm now going to turn my attention over to the chat box here and see if there might be some questions. Okay, here, remember to write your question. Okay, that's not me. Okay, can you achieve samadhi if one has never heard the Om or seen the spiritual eye? Well, in the process, of course, these things are the Om vibration, the spiritual eye, which, by the way, are two sides of the same coin. These things can come spontaneously in your meditation. And in the process of that, if you can pursue them through that spiritual eye, pass through that spiritual eye, deepen your consciousness so that you're one with the Om vibration, that those are steps, you could say they're channels lead you to that. So yes, they could all happen simultaneously, the Guru's grace, in that form, or what Yogananda, through his various lessons, introduces these topics, which is more commonly, you might say, a step-by-step process. So we want to be able to listen to the Om sound. We want to try to do what's necessary, concentrate the various, we all go into techniques in the process here, but yes, try to listen to the Om sound and the spiritual eye. Look into the light, and you'll see here, and with concentration, again, perhaps Divine Mother's grace, you begin to penetrate there. But what is the obstacle? Why don't we see these? Because it's not that we create them. The problem is that they're obscured. We don't hear the sounds because we hear everything else. We don't see the light because we see everything else. You have to remove the veils. And this is spiritual tradition always speaks about removing the veils of delusion, that the restless mind can't sit still. And so people become discouraged. And this is why people take up the path of yoga, of deep meditation. They don't last because they get discouraged. And I guess our job here is, when we share these sorts of things, is try to help people overcome discouragement and be inspired, because it's not an all or nothing endeavor. There's great joy as we proceed along the way. We see a little bit of light, hear a little bit of sound, we feel love in our heart, we feel even feeling peaceful in a moment. I remember, I'm sure all of you have had this experience that you've had a busy day, terrible. It's, all the things come, and then you just go outside and you sit under a tree on a bench and just look out at the sunset, or look and just feel that moment of calm, peacefulness, of just putting aside all of the troubles of the day. Hang on to that feeling. I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, yes, we know from experience that those other things are going to invade us, but to the degree that we meditate or even find that moment of calmness in life, to be able to just experience that, hang on to it, and then learn to bring it back to you at a moment's notice during the middle of the day. Because why can't we just that restful feeling when you just put everything aside and you're looking out at the expansive horizon from your park bench or wherever it might be. Learn to bring that back to you at a moment's notice in the middle of all that chaos. That's what meditation does for us. That's why we meditate. We're meditating to be able to invite a peaceful state, calm state, blissful state even, loving state, so that in the midst of our daily activities, we can recall it, or at least be influenced by it. And if to the degree that you can recall it, then you develop a habit. Then you begin to work during the day. You work in the consciousness of that, keeping your attention upward and remembering you don't need to get angry at every drop of a pin. Stay calm. And then pretty soon it becomes your daily attitude. Well, as that begins to happen, when you go to meditate, you say, oh, you start to go deeper and deeper into your practice. So wherever you are, and remember the day-to-day challenges of life, whether it's in business, school, relationships, are the tests that are coming to you. Have you learned anything? And you have to pass the first grade before you can go into the second or third grade. And so, so people are, why don't you come to me? God, well, you can't even sit still for 5 minutes. So now there's always God's grace. And believe me, I've had those experiences of God's grace. I didn't deserve anything, but somehow I felt blessed in some fashion. But does it last? No, but I remember it. And because I remember it coming, I thought, okay, but why not? I can recall a little bit, but why not open the door through our daily life to allow that to come in more readily? That's what the spiritual path is about. Learning to attune. We don't create grace, but we learn to harmonize. We have the ability to harmonize with the flow of grace. And that flow of grace will take you up to that consciousness. And then there comes a point, I firmly believe, we do our part, and that flow of grace sucks you up into that light. It's like Master said, the breath was pulled out of him. And we just have to put ourselves to the point, say, Master, with a devotional heart, take it away, Master, take it away. I'm ready to give it up. So there's a day-to-day endeavor, but it is there. This is what Masters, and coming back to where we started, it's there, and he gives us the enthusiasm and the encouragement to say this is not far away. It's there for every one of us if we open ourselves up to it. So, okay, wait a minute. I should go on. What about sleeping state that Yogananda coins? No, it's not sleeping state. Sleeping state is subconscious, so it's not subconsciousness. Does free us from the birth rebirth cycle? No, it does not. Samadhi does not free us from the birth cycle. That comes later. We have to enter this state. And then we still, even to the point, because if we go into Savikalpa Samadhi, we come back, our ego is still active. It's only when we go beyond the ego that we stop creating karma. So that's our first goal. Stop creating new karma. And then, our lifetime, but there's a lot of old karma there too, still. So the first step, go beyond the ego. Even temporarily, Savikalpa Samadhi is a temporary blissful state. And we come back and we purify ourselves. Eventually we get to the point where we're not bound by ego any longer, but that's not the end of it either, because we still have all those million lifetimes behind us where we still have that karma. That can be worked out. So it's a process, you could say. It's a process. So, but let's take the first step, see, and it's blissful. So even if you have those million lifetimes, Yogananda said, don't worry about it. You won't care. It'll take time, but you'll be in a blissful state. Don't worry about it. And so, okay, why did Yogananda say that in this state you can't hold on to that Samadhi, and then it will be painful? He wasn't saying it to Swami Kriyananda. He said that to somebody else, because you can't hold on to it because your ego is still being tested. You see, you get into, like we talk about, the ego is strong. But the ego can dilute, put it this way. Maya is very strong. Just because we've reached the high state of meditation, just because maybe we've got a sabikalpas, we're not beyond Maya. And don't test Maya. I mean, you better fall down and, Divine Mother, I don't want to go that way. Believe me, Maya will test you. And all of us are tested by Maya at one point or another. Delusion, in other words. The word delusion of this world are endless. So be humble. And unfortunately, when the ego gets very strong, it loses that humility sometimes. And we go off, oh, I could finally attain that what I wanted. I have the power to be able, and away you go. And you fall. So but it's about getting up. That's what the spiritual path is, getting up again and again and again. And no matter how far you fall, always get up, because it's our destiny to ultimately succeed. And the Guru's always there. Guru helps. So our Jivan Muktas in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, yes, you could say that that's a characteristic. When we reach the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we're known as a Jivan Mukta at that point, yes. What is the difference between Christ and cosmic? I'm assuming the difference between Christ consciousness and cosmic consciousness, Christ as the personality of Jesus. That's a long, big topic. In this question and answer, maybe I can get to that in the future, because it's going to be too difficult, and it doesn't really apply here to this topic of today, although it touches on it. So I'm going to pass on that because it's too big a topic. How get away from this ego when it keeps you have to give it away, you see, and you offer the ego. Now it takes a strong person, you see, it takes a strong person to give it away. And as you progress on the spiritual life, you don't become weaker. Your ego doesn't become weaker. It becomes stronger. You become strong. Now, at the same time, strong doesn't mean you're strong in egotistical behavior or thoughts. You see, you have something precious. The ego is our friend in a way, because the ego gives us the power to choose this, choose that, our free will, you could say. So we want that to be strong. But then it's discrimination. Remember, coming back to that word, we have to learn to discriminate. To what are we going to do with if we have a very powerful tool, which is what we need. If you want to make progress on the spiritual path, you have to be strong. But you have to use it in the right way, you see. And that's where discrimination comes in. So you have to, and so a guru doesn't want weaklings. A guru makes strong disciples. And the strong disciple develops the ability to use what they've been given in a positive way for their own salvation. And ultimately, that means releasing. And I think we've talked about this before, and certainly in other classes, how the Mahabharata, the ego is represented by Bhishma, great warrior. And Bhishma, ultimately, he had the strength to surrender his self on the battlefield. He taught the Pandavas how to defeat him. He told them, here's how you defeat me. Not because he was weak, because he was strong. He says, I'm tired, you could defeat me. And they do. And so consequently, it's the same thing for here. So, okay, then I guess how to get away from that, I think you have to develop strong love at the same time. Strong love, self-surrender, an attachment to something higher, which is God. Attach yourself to God. If you have to have an attachment, that's where you want to attach yourself to. And which state of meditation is it when one can see and feel nature in a very up and close way? You can't define it by a state of meditation, but basically it's when you can merge yourself in the Om vibration. You're merging yourself with the cosmic force of Om. And that cosmic form is in every atom of creation. When you can, listening to the Om sound takes you into an expansiveness because you're identifying with the very nature of this creation itself. And so that's really what you could say. When we can learn to merge our consciousness into the sound of Om, that would be what you're looking for here with this question. So, but that's possible. Remember going back to where I started when masters wrote in those very early lessons, now listen to the Muladhara, now listen to the sound of the Swadhisthana. Sounded so easy, but my God, that's a very deep state and takes a lot of Guru's grace and a lot of self-effort. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's getting late, and look forward to seeing you again next week. Read from there about, we're at now in the book, we're roughly Sloka chapter 123 or 4. Now, Patanjali is going to, now he said, he's introduced this topic of Samadhi. Now, because now if you just left it at that, you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to, now he's going to talk about Ishvara, the other side of the coin, the divine, you know, that relationship in which we're not isolated. It's just not me and my own efforts that is involved here. There's another element of it. It's the divine element. He's now going to begin talking about Ishvara, God, in that format. So pick it up from there. Let's go forward, and we'll talk on that subject next week. Okay, joy to you. Glad to be able to share with you.